What up, everybody? Scuffy here, and today is the Iron Warriors card by card reboot. The Iron Warriors came out about a year ago, a little over a year ago, over a year ago. The Iron Warriors have been out in the game. They've been around for quite some time, and they've gotten by. Their whole thing is, their faction card pool is very true to their fluff. Give or take, whether you like it or not, it is what it is. Some of their cards have seen some changes. Some of their cards have not seen any changes, despite everybody wishing that they would. And yet they persevere, yet they somehow eke along. And I think some of the additional neutrals added, most especially with the Malevolence expansion, have certainly breathed some new life into them. So let's go ahead and take a look. We're going to start off with Barman Falk because he's the first in the order of the list. Falk he's a beast. He's a brutal beast. I haven't played with him for a while, but there are lots of videos with Falk. I did Falk for 2 seasons. I ran Falk back before his ability used to cost 2, and he didn't start with an extra card. Now he starts with an extra card, and he has ability for 1. He got better. He could always pump out the damage. That was never any different. It just became easier for people to do it. But I remember the first time I did that was in an event when he came out, and I did like 20 some odd damage in 1 turn, and I was like, okay, I gotta work on this guy. Time has come, time has gone, and Falk remains very strong. I see a lot of decks out there that use Falk, obviously in combination with some other cards within the card pool, but his ability to, for 1 energy, giving +2/+0 to all of your troops. They take some damage, but they all came up huge. You can turn your Goldstone Hunters or any fast or flank unit into an additional +2. That's a 5 attack or perhaps a 7 attack, depending on how expensive they are for what you need them to do. In addition to that, that goes for everything else that you've already got on the board. So very quickly, if you've got a 3 health troop on the board that you're not going to do anything with, you can turn them into a 5 attack damage. There's nothing wrong with that. It gets stronger as the game goes on, and you can put down more troops. It goes very strong with several cards that we're going to take a look at and talk about, because it just simply amplifies what they already do. But it's very brutal. Now, the trade-off with that is this is a purely, even though it's an offensive ability, it's not coming from him directly. You need to have a troop on board. If you don't have any troops, his ability is worthless. If you don't have, if you've got to take care of stuff from your opponent on the board, you've got to use Falk to do it with a face strike, then you're throwing off your momentum. So you do lose some things there. But there are tactics and there are other tools within the card pool that allow for Falk to function very efficiently. Now, Forex is probably, he's rough, man. He's rough. He's gained 1 thing in over a year and a half. He always had the 2E put in play a barricade. And by the way, the barricade is just, for 2 energy, it's the greatest card you could ever ask for. That's not true at all. It is a for 2 energy. Is it in the neutral pool? It should be in the neutral. Yeah, for 2 energy with Forex's ability, you get to put in play a 1 energy card. That's what it does. It's now the fact that his ability is on demand and he can always throw that out there, that's the saving grace, right? That's why you could argue that it's worth it. Is it really? It is, to some extent, if you can make it work, especially late game with some of the cards that he's got. More importantly, if you're using it with cards like Attrition Warfare or not harsh discipline, Decimation. It's an easy disposable troop. You can use it. Why not? Go for it. But that's what he's always had. He recently gained the ability to destroy structures damaged by attacking them. A lot of people seem to forget that. But it is effective. He can get rid of a Pharaohs. He can get rid of a Pyramid of Tisca. Any sort of structure that you've got, whether it be a bunker, command bunker, etc., etc., he can just attack it and it's gone. Some people forget that when they play against him, and some people forget that when they play with him because nobody plays him a whole lot. I had to work a lot when I had him for some various testing to various changes that they've made to the Iron Warriors card pool throughout the time being, and his win rate was never good. I had to work a lot recently, not following this change, but following some of the additional neutral changes to get his win rate to a 50%. It can be done. It's fun to do. It's hard to do. So the results with Forex can be frustrating, right? He's He just does what he does. He puts out barricades. He's not going to, just in the same way that Falk isn't going to be able to do anything, so too is Ferox. As a matter of fact, for that point, so is Draeger. He's got a great ability. If you ask me, he's got a 1 energy. Now, this used to cost 2 energy, and he used to just get the vehicle. Now he gets a vehicle, and it gives him +0/+1 health. For 1 energy, that's really good later in the game. More importantly, it's a Iron Warriors vehicle, so you're tied to that Iron Warriors pool, which is good because you know what to expect. There are some very strong vehicles. There are some so-so vehicles, but there are some very strong vehicles within that card pool. And you can build a good vehicle deck with Draeger in there. He's also got Survivor 5. It's a strong ability. He functions pretty good. You do have to play certain cards within the deck, whether it be tactics or supportive troops, to make it really work out good. But it's easy enough to do. For a rare warlord, he actually works out pretty well. Surprisingly, the epic warlord here is Falk, who starts with an extra card in hand, versus the rare. But he's got Survivor 5, so that's the trade-off. Now, Percherabo is the only damage-dealing warlord of the Iron Warriors lot, which is surprising given how much the Iron Warriors are known for. All the damage for the faction goes within their tactics and their troops. Percherabo has got the siege function, which is arguably the worst mechanic in the game. There are merits to it. There are some cards who pull off the siege function very well, such as Shero can. Then there are those cards like many troops who cannot pull it off. I think siege works really good on a warlord. It does not work so well on troops. It's very hard to do, and you've got to support it right. It's not something to bank on. But Percherabo can bank on that siege ability to deal 6 damage. Again, these wins here, these played games, these are all like testing games. I think recently I've played them a little bit more with the neutral changes and seen more success, better win rate. But I think ultimately, I've had the most fun playing Falk way before we had this little warlord stat box up here. Forex I've had fun with too, but again, it was a grind getting him up there, and I haven't played Draeger enough following some of the neutral changes. It's mainly been Percherabo and Forex who I've been dealing with. One day we'll make a Draeger video. Why not? Why not? But Percharabo's got a great ability for a Primarch. He can deal 6 damage for siege every other turn. That's great to either deter your opponent from dropping troops that he can destroy outright, or just for late game comboing with some of the tactics to deal damage. His Whispers ability, that's a little tricky to pull off, but it's easier to pull off now thanks to neutral cards such as Arcology. His Whispers card costs -1 when a friendly troop dies during your turn, while Arcology creates a troop at the end of your turn and at the end of your opponent's turn. So right off the bat, you're going to have a troop that you can throw. In addition to that, there's some changes within the card pool, but mostly Arcology or fast troops or flank troops help reduce his Whispers cost. Once he becomes Once he becomes the Lord of Iron, he does have the ability to put in an Iron Circle. Instead of dealing damage, he then creates a 8-drop, 8/8 front line who attacks by itself. Now, it's important to note that if you have his siege already prepped from his non-Whispers ability, and then you play his Whispers, his siege will automatically release, and he will summon an Iron Circle, and then you can activate his siege again. Now, if you do that on the same turn, that won't work, but there is some timing there, and that's designed, it works as it's designed. That's the way it's supposed to work. So it's very possible to not only transform to the Lord of Iron, but in the same turn also summon an Iron Circle. And that's a nice little survival boost. Not only are you getting the 8 health from the transformation, you're getting the 8 health front line. That can be very handy. So Percherabo is actually, especially as of late, risen up because his ability to just lay out fat damage on those aggro warlords, on warlords who maybe are chewing up through front lines, and then just late game he can burst out for a lot of damage for very little energy. Even for a lot of energy, I mean, the more energy you give him, the more damage he can do. So he's probably good in terms of ranking the warlords. I would probably rank Percherabo arguably tied for first with Falk. It depends on your build, but I think Percherabo being a Primarch, having a little extra health, and being able to be a little bit more flexible in how you build him, has the range. Falk can be flexible too, though he is contingent on troops. And if you're able to thwart his troops, you can't do much other than, he can throw out some damage tactics, whereas Percherabo can deal damage, rely on troops, or rely on other tactics as well. So he's a little bit more flexible or has some late game options that Falk might falter from if the draws don't go his way. Now, Draenor Squad, these guys have never changed. I like the artwork. I've always liked the comic book style artwork here. But for 2 energy, they put in play a bunker. Now, the downside is these guys are a 1 and a 1/3. There is a better rare equivalent that we're going to get to in a little bit here. They're okay, and I see them in event decks. Occasionally, we've had with the Iron Warriors. And in events, they can put up the merit. Bunker is a 1/5 frontline. It's better than your barricade from Forex. Note. Now these guys are probably the best 2-drop. Second best, maybe first best. There's 2 really good 2-drops for the Iron Warriors, and the 5th support is one of these guys because at the end of your turn you're going to deal 2 damage to a random non-warlord enemy. Now that works a lot, very similar to the Caban squad, right? But the difference is this is a rally effect and you have to target it, whereas with the Iron Warriors, this is a random. That means that they can actually hit troops in stealth, and that's what's really nice about these guys. If your opponent has got a stealth 2 health troop, you throw down 5th support, and they don't have that troop anymore. If you throw down 5th support behind a barricade or another frontline unit, you've got a protected way to really stymie their troops. Now, is it as good as Oros from the Orphans of War for 2? Probably not, right? Probably not, but we'll take it. We'll take it. 2 health, 2 damage. Sure. Attrition Warfare. Now, this card has changed. I'm trying to remember what this card did initially. I think this used to do something. This used to do something completely different than removing siege from a friendly troop's ability. I cannot for the life of me recall what it was because I never played this card. It was terrible. It's only slightly better now in the fact that you can remove siege from a friendly troop's ability. So like in the event that you have a siege troop and you've got this card in your hand, your opponent thinks that they've got 2 turns before you activate that siege ability, you can say surprise and activate that siege ability after you pay the 2 energy to pay this card. That's very combo-y. It still doesn't work out very well. I can tell you through testing, ample games of testing. I mean, I wouldn't say all 105 plus 17. I wouldn't say all 122 games I play with Attrition Warfare, but I would probably say 1/3 of those games I play with Attrition Warfare, and I found it is not worth including in your deck. Decimation has its merits. Decimation is a little bit better to include in your deck. It feels more natural to include it in a Forex deck because you've got that throwaway. It is pretty good early game. Late game, not so much. But if you're able to destroy a friendly troop, such as a wounded barricade, doesn't cost you anything, you can give all your troops +1, well, I can't say all your troops, all your starties and infantry. That's important to note. +1/+1. That's why it's not so good in Draeger, because if you're building a vehicle Draeger deck, there's only so many cards within your deck that are probably going to merit from this. But if you're able to give +1/+1, suddenly those Goldstone Hunters become a 3/3, which is really good because then they can stay on the board a little bit longer, or 3/4, I should say, 4/3. You use that a second time, then they're a 5/4, and there are other cards that increase their stats. So, this is not a bad card. It doesn't go in every deck, but it does go in some. And really the 2-cost tactics is tricky, because depending on your deck, you always want to try to include a harsh discipline. Not always, but usually at least having one of is worth it, especially in Falk for one specific troop, the Trantikos Veterans, Trantikos. But this is just for an even exchange. If you're able to deal 1 damage to a friendly infantry or starties, they get Bloodthirst, and as long as they've got more than 4 health, or if they've got 4 health, you could, and your warlord, your opponent's warlord doesn't have 3 attack, you're going to get double the attack out of those troops. This goes extra uber for the Trantikos Veterans who when they take damage get stronger. And in conjunction with Falk, you can just do devastatingly brutal things. But just even for having a siege troop, you can wound them, and then you can use their siege ability if that's what you want to do. Or you could wound them and attack with this guy twice and deal 6 damage. Deal 6 damage, or put in play 2 2/3, depending on what your opponent's board looks like, what their tactics look like, energy pool. Maybe it's worth it. Maybe it's not. That's a give and take. Usually you see that more so with the Trantikos Vetch. but I have seen it many a times with many of these other cards. I personally have always enjoyed playing it with Torbert Squad, but now I could play Attrition Warfare if I want to. And guess what? I still don't. So, it's okay. I would probably argue Decimation has got just the better variety. Harsh Discipline is good as a 2 of in some decks, as a 1 of in others. Olympian Recruits is not necessarily a card that you would include in your deck. They do come in from several cards in this faction that create these. They have a new added ability. Before, they just had no ability. They did nothing. It was, why even have this card? Now they have the ability to remove siege from a friendly troop. So that's something that's nice, if they can survive. There are ways to get it to work. It's not something you build around. It's just something that you get a benefit from. And unfortunately, it only works from a friendly troop, not from your warlord. So you're never going to be able to remove siege from your warlord. You're just stuck with it, right? Now, Rackarous Squad. I like Rackarous Squad. As disposable as these guys are, they don't do anything they're not going to ramp up an attack with Falk. But as disposable as they are, the fact that they put in play a barricade, they buy you a little bit of a speed bump, they give you a little bit of a body. They can help feed into Percharavos Whispers. They can help build a faster board for Forex. If in a pinch, they can also do the same for Draeger and Falk. They are pretty decent for a 2-drop. They're not great, but they're not bad either. And in a pinch, if you really wanted to, you could throw them away for Decimation, or if you've used Decimation, they just simply get stronger from there. So I do like these troops. It's a hard call between 5th support and Rackarous, and usually I have both in a deck. Superior firepower, start to get into these tactics that destroy things or deal damage. And these guys have got the way to destroy a troop with 3 attack or less. And that's pretty powerful. You can remove a lot of annoyances or threats on the board. You can remove Kai's Elaine. Jubok is often what I see it used up against. It seems every time you play Jubok, your opponent's got a superior firepower in hand on their next turn. But it's a very good card. It removes front lines with low attack. If you have a way to, if you've got the 3 attack, there's so many cards that have 3 attack or less. This can actually work on that. Sometimes you get a lot of value for it. Is it worth having more than 1 in a deck? I don't know, but I find that having 1, I never regret. Breacher Squad is really good because if you can stick 1 Breacher Squad on the board and they don't go away, you can continuously stick Breacher Squads on the board. Just use their ability. I like the artwork as well. And notice that their ability is not a siege ability. It doesn't have anything to do with siege. It just is a way of getting you troops. It just has a way of getting you troops on the board. And keeping them on board. And most importantly, frontline on the board. Now, Endymion Squad, these guys haven't changed. Their stats are still the same. The change that happened with them really was the fact that the Olympian recruits allowed them to remove siege. I think maybe on release these guys might have had a 1 energy ability instead of a 0 energy ability. I have tried so many games with Endymion Squad, and eventually I just got rid of them. They're an epic card that does nothing. They've been changed or updated. The cards that support them have been changed and updated. They just don't work. They don't work well. They don't do anything for you. You lose time. Even if you're trying to find a way to do a grind deck, it's just worth better putting other cards in your deck. I'd like to see this troop changed. In general, for your 3 cost, the Breacher Squad is your best bet. In terms of troop, if you're looking for something else, Rhino 7/7 out of 235 is really good because this is a specific tutor. It means it's going to always pull an Astartes from your deck at least 1 time because you're going to put it on the board, and at the end of your turn you're going to get a troop. And if you've built your deck a certain way, especially like the Falk decks, where you only have so many Astartes in your deck, you're going to get what you need. If you built your deck just to have extra Astartes, you're going to get an extra card. That's great. It's not going to be a tactic, and it's going to be a body that you can use. Then that's going to be beneficial. Olympia. This is really good in event decks, and I'll see somebody use this in a normal gameplay, and I don't understand why, or they just don't have enough cards. It put in your hand 3 Iron Warriors Astartes that cost 4 or less. Now there are a lot of Iron Warriors Astartes that cost 4 or less, but there are not that many that are really good. It just seems like you're for 3 energy as a throwaway, you're hoping to get some troops that might be good, and for all you know, you could end up with several of these guys, an Olympian recruits, or, you know, maybe at best you're going to get the Trantikos Veteran. At best. That's it. So you could get a fifth support, you could get a rack rest, but there really is not a broad range of very versatile early drop troops. I just don't feel the need to include this, and I think that this should be passed over. Precision bombardment, though, that's a 2 of. This card just works all the time. For 3, you deal 3. It's very similar to the even cost and tactic exchange, Chariot of the Gods, Longinus. But if target dies, return this card to your deck and draw a card. And that always pays dividends because you're getting this card back. Any card that you can get back and use a second time, whether that's later in the game or even on the same turn, is beneficial. And if you're not getting it back, you're drawing a card back. There were so many problems with Oncto, which for the Thousand Suns cost 4, did 4, and did the same thing if you had no troops. This just simply has to do, deal the damage and destroy a troop, and then you get it back. And if you don't want to use it on a troop, you can use it on a Warlord. It's such a versatile card. If you don't have 2, you want to get 2 of these. I've already talked about Rhino. Rhino is a good common. I don't think, unless you are running an all-vehicle deck, there's really no reason not to include it if you've got 2 or 3 Astartes, especially the higher cost Astartes that you want to have. This is a good card to have. Sheath and Steel, pass. It's not great. It's in theory seems good. You're giving +1/+1 to all vehicles in your hand and deck, and you draw a card. And if you get this out early on in game, if you're able to play this at 3 energy, that can cause a lot of strength. Good, sure, but if you don't, it doesn't do anything for anything that's on the board. It doesn't do anything. Your odds are you're not going to be able to play a vehicle in the same turn. It just is not huge. There are better enhancements to vehicles that you can get from troops via the Mechanicum neutrals that you can see, and there's so many. Oh, there's so many things in here that enhance troops or benefit troops in some way, shape, and form. Some of them you might say, yeah, that's not so great, you know, but that's really not the case. There are so many vehicles that are out there that you can actually, let's find a good one. These guys here, these guys are great. Sure, heal it and give it +2/+0. How about we give them, we get frontline, and then we've got one here that gives everything shield. Is that this guy? Yeah, I mean, there's just better ways to go. They cost a little bit more, but you get more out of it. I've not found that card useful. Store Brazok is also useful kind of in events, like if you're facing other Iron Warriors decks with a lot of frontline. Frontline has not seen a lot of play as of late. We kind of talked about that in the Death Guard card by card reboot. So the benefit of these guys is very minimal. They can, in theory, get rid of a frontline troop as a rally effect, which is great. But you're never going to see that. So just don't. I mean, if you're going to go for a troop with 4 attack, go with these guys. And even then, that's throwing a Hail Mary here, because you got like 4 guys who've got to die in your turn to give these guys a Mark of Chaos, enough Marks of Chaos to turn into a Greater Demon. I don't ever play with Prendel Squad. I've thought about it in like a Percherabo Whispers. I just can never justify it. This hasn't changed. I mean, I think it might have had to be like initially at one point, like when a troop dies on your turn as opposed to attacks and dies. Or it could have just always been that ability. Logos is really good. Logos is some healing within the faction, which is great, and then it also gives your Warlord the ability to give +1/+0 to vehicles and structures you put in play. It was changed to include structures as a suggested improvement to Forex. It doesn't work so well in that regards. There are some structures, like if you play this and then you play a Pyramid or a Mount Pharos, for instance, it's now immune to Jukebox, so there is some benefit there. That's nice, but it's not huge. The healing 4 is more the important thing, and late game, every now and then that +1/+0 might help, but really being able to heal 4 is a good thing. I usually have 1 to 2 in a deck just for that extra boost. If I can't include them, then there's got to be a reason for it, right? I'm just going for speed. Melbourne Squad has got a great siege ability, the ability to destroy an enemy troop, and that is some classic artwork, right? I dig it. But I can't. For a common, I'd rather use them to attack for 5, I guess. And I can't justify passing a turn to use their to prep their siege. Like if they were stealthed or something like that, and I could prep their siege safely and threaten the board, there is a better better mirror of this card as a vehicle in the faction that works a lot better. Though the bitter end is a good common. This is actually a good pinch play, either late game, and you're trying to hunker down in there and thwart your opponent as best as you can, or you have just buying yourself a little bit more time. For 4, you're getting 2 barricades. Now again, you're paying 4 energy to put in play 2 1 energy cards. Doesn't seem like a fair trade, but you are also drawing a card, and the barricades themselves are frontline, so technically there is some argument there that you're getting your money's worth. But it is a good card to have. Sometimes just having one of those in play can buy you the turn that you need. A little extra speed bumps, thwart some fast troops, whatever the case may be. Torbert Squad, I've already talked about these guys a little bit. I love their siege ability. I think it's a fantastic siege ability. It's good cost for the fact that you've got to do siege. It's very hard to do, and just doing it itself sometimes is the result, is the happy reward. But overall, for a 4 cost, they seem decent. They're balanced as a common. They're very good in sealed decks where there's very little removal, because then they become a threat on the board your opponent has to respond to. But outside of that, they don't see a lot of play, and there's a good reason for that. There's just, rather than spend 2 turns to then deal 3 damage to all enemies, for less, you can play a tactic that deals 3 damage to kill the 1 enemy that you want to deal, and then you get this card back in your hand. And you get that on the turn that you want it, not the next turn. Now, Trantikos Veterans, these guys are not the best rare in the set, in the faction, but they are one of the best rares in the faction. They put a lot of heat on the board, and if your opponent cannot deal with these and remove these guys, they can almost single-handedly win the game. For every time they take a damage, they gain +2/+0, and there are ways to damage your own troops, right? How about we give them an extra 1 damage, and then they become a 5/5/5. Oh, but also they give themselves a damage, so then they're a 7/4 with Bloodthirst. Okay, and then you have Falk, who can lash them, and then they become a 9/3 with Bloodthirst. You see where this is going? If you make them stronger via cards like Decimation, they can their range is limitless, but very powerful. Very powerful. They can you can use Escape Vent, is a popular trick to help stealth these guys. 9 times out of 10, your opponent will have a mortar strike that will hit these guys right on the button. But if it doesn't, you'll have a happy day. These guys are really good, and I feel like most, like 90% of the builds should have a Trantikos Veterans in there. Whether that is to work the combo around dealing the damage, or simply to draw heat and card removal on them, and you continue to build your board and your big threats emerge. They play a very good part in that. You do want to have 2 of those, whether that is for 1 deck or just for your purposes that you're going to build some other time. Now, 30th Heavy Squad, these guys' ability got better. It used to be dealing 2 damage to random enemy troop, and they now deal 3 damage. But for their cost, I don't like it. I'd rather just deal with the 4 damage, and it doesn't even do a random enemy unit. It's a random enemy troop. So I feel like it just is a throwaway. It's kind of like a way to give them anti-stealth, but not really give them anti-stealth. I'd rather play, either Alice Scaramanca, Decimators, Dominators. I just feel like there's better cost to play. Now, speaking of Scaramanca, this guy's pretty good, decent stat, 5/6 for a 5. He also gives your friendly vehicles +1/+0. Now, his ability is very costly. I've only used it once or twice. It's very nice if you're able to use it. You just straight take control of an enemy vehicle. You're not dealing damage to it. There's no contingency there. It's a vehicle. It's now mine, and I gain all the benefits of it. And then they also, as vehicles, get +1/+0. But just putting him down as a 5/6 sometimes as a threat is very effective, more so than his actual ability. At the very least, if you've got several vehicles on the board late game, you can throw him down and they have +1/+0, and you gain some benefit there, especially if they've already been enhanced by other cards, whether that be Sheath in Steel or Draeger or Logos. It just combines and just adds an extra layer onto that. Now, Contrador is the finisher for this faction. This is their Pride of the Emperor, their vengeful spirit. It costs less. Why does it cost less? Because you put it in your opponent's deck after you use it. So you really only want to use it if you're going to end the game, or at the very least as a Hail Mary. It's not something that you throw away early on, your opponent might draw it and use it against you. Thematically, it's because the Contrador was captured during the Battle of Fall, if I recall correctly. It might have been before Fall, but ultimately was captured by Loyalist troops at that point in time. So that's why thematically it makes sense. And ultimately, it's really powerful. It's for 5, you're dealing 7, which means you're dealing more than the cost of the card. It means for 8 energy, you can deal 5 to deal 7, plus 3 to deal 3. So you're dealing 10 for 8. Or if you've got Percherabo for 8, and you've already got his ability prep, you're dealing 13. You can see the burst range of this faction. Just like they can go from nothing to in-your-face explosion. The lethal range on them is huge. And that's just with 8 energy. That's not counting in the additional 2 energy, or the possibility of something drawn by abandoned supplies or war room, or anything else on the board. The options there are very high. Contrador is probably the number one to buy for the Iron Warrior. Save up your gems for this card. That's the one that you're going to want to have. Once you have it, you will find that your end game options open up a lot, because sometimes your opponent's at 11 health. We've got 8 energy, did 8 damage or 10 damage, and then we attack with our Warlord. We've done 12 damage. We win the game, and you're only at 8 energy, so it's very possible to do. Dominators are really good. And they're especially good if you've got a lot of troops in your deck and you've got a lot of troops in your hand. When a friendly troop dies during your turn, you get +1/+1 2 troops in your hand, and it just continues. It's like a training cage, because these guys are whipping their boys into shape, and they're saying, "See, if you don't like this, you want to grind yourself, then you better get stronger." You throw these guys down after a turn where you've still got Havoc Squad on the board, or even a Breacher Squad. You guys throw these guys and X them, and all of a sudden your Goldstone in hand goes a 4/3, and then a 5/4, and so on and so forth. And you can save that up in your hand for quite some time. Not to mention any other Dominators, Monka, Havoc Squads, any vehicles, whatever it is, that these guys are just going to make them all stronger. Every troop, not just Astartes, infantry, vehicles, structures. They're really good. They don't have to be in every deck. Again, if you're not building a troop-based deck, there's no need for it. But if you are going to have troops in there, I think for the cost and for what they do, they are very good. 5 for 5 for 5, which also enhances everything in your hand. Cannot deny it. Not even just in your deck. Like, if it's in your deck, you gotta draw it still. It's already in your hand. Now you just gotta play it. So these guys are really good. Percharavos Wrath. This card I have personal beef with, not because I've lost games to it. Way back when the Iron Warriors were released, if you can go back and watch my crate opening for that, there was some issues with the crates at that time, and Everguild hadn't coded it correctly, so they weren't dropping legendaries at all. And I received like 5 or 6 Percharavos Wrath in that one crate opening. I opened like 60 crates. To this day, I think I have received about 14 or 15 Percharavos Wrath. I can't say I've lost count. It's somewhere in that range. And every time I see it, I have my own little Wrath. I have my own little session. It's a great card. Giving Bloodthirst to your units. That's all your units on board, which includes your Warlord, is often the end game. This is just as effective at ending games as Contrador is. It's huge. It's a little trickier because you gain more out of it by having units on the board. If you don't have any units on the board, then you're really just giving your Warlord Bloodthirst, and then it kind of loses its steam. But if you've got it as a 1-up in your deck, it's very strong. I like the artwork, but the fact that I've seen it too many times in crate openings, more times than I should have, that's where I really, let's get past it. Promidon, it's a 6/4 frontline. It's a vehicle and it's a frontline, and for 5, it's got only 4 health, which means it can be destroyed by crack grenade, breach, anything that does 4 damage, and there's many that do 3+1s. I'm going to pass. I like the attack, the 6/4, that's great, but if they were 6/5 frontline, I'd be happier. Even though that 5 is still susceptible to crack grenade and breach, I'd feel happier about it. As it is, I don't. Your best bet with them, honestly, is if you draw Promidon with Draeger and then make it a 6/5. And that's really where that's where you actually see them. You won't see me put them in decks, but you'll see them pop up in the game as a result of something like that. Now, viral bombs got really big here for several reasons. And I think that at this point, if you're playing Iron Warriors, thematically, you always want to have one, right? But now I think you really should have two, because it is a huge board wipe card. But the way it triggers now is differently. Every guild has gone in and they've done some changes to the way timing works at the end of the game. So it's very likely that you can have all your triggers, all the backlash triggers trigger, even though you're a warlord, whether it be yours or your opponent's, is at 0 health. Everything will still continue to work until there's nothing left to go, which means that you can turn a loss into a draw with viral bombs. It also means that you've got cards now, especially cards like Arcology, which is a huge upturn in the meta. Arcology here is the one that's putting out troops in the board, and guess what? When it destroys itself, you put in play 5 unsettled populace. All of those are highly susceptible to a viral bombs. All of those can be viral bombed into oblivion, whether you were using them to attack and feed your Dominators so that you're enhancing your troops, or you're just blowing stuff up. You're blowing your own stuff up and you're bombing the planet, and everybody loses. Or you can use this to clear your opponent's board. If they've got a board full of rot flies and one of them is at 1 health, you can clear that whole board of rot flies. Now, you're going to take some damage too. You're going to take a lot of damage. So is their warlord. As long as you have more health than they do when you launch a viral bombs, you remain in an advantageous position. If you can capitalize on a viral bombs late game by adding a precision bombardment or adding a Contrador, then you increase your options for it. So I feel like this card went up from a 1 of in a dex to 2 ofs in a dex. The board state as it is with toads or the rot flies, various summoning troops, whatever the case may be, I just feel that it's a strong card to have in the game, and for the faction, and it's thematically, and it works very well. So I'd recommend that. Now, Rack and Ruin changed a little bit. Before, it used to deal 4 damage, and if it was a vehicle, it destroyed it, if I recall correctly. Now it doesn't. It's a vehicle structure Titan weapon, and that was the big change, was they added this to deal with Canis Vertex. It deals 10 additional damage, and that can be huge against a Titan weapon, but not being able to destroy a vehicle does kind of suck. For 5, it was kind of like a cheaper Melt-A-Bomb, so you lose that a little bit. But you can still deal 14 damage, and the way the timing works on that is you could destroy or deal damage to a vehicle that has Survivor, and then deal 10 more damage, and therefore get past the Survivor. I like having one of these in the deck. The fact that you can deal that damage, that 4 damage on your opponent's Warlord, again, in conjunction with cards like Contrador or Precision Bombardment, there's so much room and range there for damage dealing tactics within this faction, and it just fits hand in hand. Why you can have a Percherabo deck that has some troops in it, or you can have an all tactic Percherabo deck. There are some merits to both. You can argue which one is more effective, but you cannot deny that that is an effective tactic. I think it's a fair costed tactic, and I would not want to be Canis Vertex facing up with that and losing basically 14 damage to one of my arms. And if I have that in my hand, I know I'm going for one of those, then by that point, that's like an instant kill on a shoulder. Ancient Heron, talking about instant kill, I love this card. I love the character, I love the art, I love the fact that it's a rally, he destroys an enemy troop with frontline. So many Telemon Dreadnoughts have fallen to Ancient Heron. It's fantastic. The fact that he just, as a rally, just boom, it's gone, and then you have a nice 6/6 on the board. These guys can get buffed with Draeger, they can get buffed with Logos. It's unfortunate that he's just a legendary, and Draeger has the benefit of randomly creating him. You might see 2 or 3 Ancient Herons with Draeger, but just a great card. Maybe my second favorite, I think Contrador is the #1 legendary in the faction, and I would probably say Ancient Heron has got to be #2. Havoc Squad is a good squad. They're just good. 5/6, and after enemy attacks, deal 3 damage to it. They work really good if you can protect them with barriers, barricades. Forex loves to sit behind 2 or 3 barricades and have an Iron Havoc Squad sit back there. And if your opponent doesn't have a board clear, doesn't have a targetized sacrifice or a conqueror or something to deal 6 damage to this guy behind the front lines, they're going to be eating some damage. Not to mention he's got that 5 health. So at late game, if you really want to, you can Percharavos Wrath, and now you've got a 10 attack coming at your opponent. It's a very strong epic card. It's a 6-cost card, yes, but it's a very good card, and I do like this card. So do you need 2 in every deck? No. Some decks you do, some decks you don't. But it is a good one to pick up in the shop if you need it. And the Predatordestructor is okay. They're just a 7/5 that doesn't go away. If it's destroyed, it goes back in your deck and it costs 2 less, and that's nice, because now you're getting it for 4. And I think that changed, because before it was just it went back in your deck. Now it goes back in your deck and it's cheaper. So that's nice. But that's it. There's no rally effect. There's no constant effect. It's just the Predator that will not die. It works good for vehicle decks because you can have that continuous pressure on your opponent, especially late game when they think they've gotten rid of everything, and you throw out a 4-cost Predatordestructor, and then you throw out 2 Bitter Ends, and they've already used their board wipes. It's gonna hurt. So not bad, but because you're playing a vehicle deck, you're probably playing Draeger. And if you're playing Draeger, why would you include vehicles that you can create? Why not include tactics and troops that support them? So is it something you'll play? Maybe. Is it something that you'll include in your deck? Probably not. Forgebreaker has been changed. Forgebreaker used to give your warlord, Forgebreaker used to be the worst legendary in the game. Arguably tied with the Hammer. The Hammer has been changed and is better. It's not great. Forgebreaker has been changed and it's better, but not great. I don't know if you had to look at the legendaries that we have now, which one would come out ahead of each other, nor do I know if they would still be tied for the worst legendary in the game. But you do replace your warlord's ability with 2, deal 4 damage to an enemy, and if it's a troop stun, and that's a very good ability. And if you've got 9 energy when you play this card, you get to use it right away. That can be very nice. It seems like a slight downgrade to Percharabo's siege ability, but really, if you're able to deal 4 damage every turn, that's not bad. And you're stunning a troop if you want to use it on a troop. That's pretty good. Giving that to Forex or Draeger late game breathes new life into them and gives them lots of options. So I like the fact that it's a legendary that's not tied to a specific warlord, but it doesn't go in every deck. Its cost makes it tricky to use effectively. There have been some games I've had where I'd sit on it because I'd rather just play damage tactics. So hit or miss on that. You don't need to have Forgebreaker in your deck to win or to play. Land Raider 23 out of 2 is okay. It's pretty good. It's got a nice passive ability. It gives +1/+1 to troops you put in play. Now, keep in mind, that's a permanent +1/+1 to troops you put in play. Whereas the Sons of Horus, who you could argue have the same amount or more damage dealing tactics, have got a Land Raider that gives friendly Astartes troops +1/+1. Not permanent, just while this guy's in play for 8, whereas the Iron Warriors have got one that's less and gives it to all your troops, and that's a permanent buff. So superior Land Raider right here for the Iron Warriors. Tyrant Terminators, these guys are really good. I'm not worried about their siege ability. Their siege ability is kind of whatever. The fact that they're a 5/8 front line and they're not a vehicle means that they're not susceptible to destroy vehicle effects, and because they have that 5 attack, they can't be bounced by Melgator. That's what I like. The 7 cost, that's decent. That's fair for what they cost. For what they do, very good. And if you really wanted to use their siege ability to deal 3 damage to a random enemy 3 times and deal 9 damage, instead of using them to attack twice and deal 10 damage, so be it. But just the fact that you get a fair cost, I sometimes think one of these in a deck, but there are times I've included 2 of them just for that extra front line, because there are a few immediate answers aside from using hard removal on those guys that your opponent has to use. And if they're using hard removal on Tyrant Terminators, then that opens you up the next turn to throw down Erasmus Gold, and they are out of hard removal. And this guy used to be terrible before. I don't even remember what his ability was. It wasn't either the siege, nor was it the end of the... No, maybe it was the siege. Maybe his ability was to deal 6 damage. I don't think it was, though. No, you know what it was? That's right. Golg had Falk's ability. He had an ability that you could pay 1 and then deal damage to all your guys, and they all get buffs. Except you're not dealing damage to your warlord to give him buffs. So he was just bad. It's like, why? And you're not even using him. Then you're just whipping little boys into shape to throw little boys at your opponent's warlord. Where now, at the end of your turn, you're going to get an Olympian recruit. So you're going to get a frontline version of these guys for free. That's nice. You're getting 10 energy worth for 8 energy. you're giving it frontline, and then that card has the ability, if it survives, to remove siege from him. Then he can deal 6 damage. He's really good. His cost is fair for what it is. He's still got a siege ability. You may never use the siege ability, but if you don't use the siege ability, you're still attacking for 8. I like him. I like him now, and I actually include him in all the decks, minus the Falk deck. I don't think I have him in because I think most of the Falk you can go off before 8 energy. At that point, you don't need him. But very good card. Worth the credits. I would say Forgebreaker and Scaramanga are not. I mean, you could argue Scaramanga is not bad, but in terms of credits, you want to spend your money on Erasmus Gold, your gems, I should say, your gems on Gold, Ancient Harend, and Contrador. Those are the ones you're going to want to pick up in the shop. Iron Circle, something that you would get generated by Draeger or by Percherabo in his Whispers form. I don't play these on their own. I don't find that there's a need to. If they get created, they get created. If they work in an event deck, they work. The artwork's really nice. But that's just it. They attack on their own, so you don't have any control over them. They're just really kind of a deterrent, and they're a front line to buy you some time to put more things into play. Price of Victory is okay if you get it early on, because then it can become a 0 cost, draw 3 cards. But it's very high, and the fact that you are only drawing 3, if it was draw 4, I feel that it would be better. I've still seen games lost because they draw 3 cards and your opponent draws the combination, several energy cards. It's a 0 energy card, they draw 3, they've got 10 energy, and they're playing all their damage tactics, and that's game. So it can work, but if it's late game, you're never going to play this card because you're going to have an 8 energy card in your hand. That's why am I drawing? I'm not going to pay 8 to draw 3. You want this in your hand turn 1. Now this is my favorite troop to generate with Draeger, because they've got flank. They're an 8/9. Yes, they cost 9, so that's all you're going to do on your turn is create another troop and then throw down Sicarian. But they can come on and either destroy something with a flank attack, or if your opponent has no troops, they come on and you prep that siege, and now you have the ability to destroy an enemy troop as well as or threaten their warlord with that. It's very costly, right? Very costly, but a very good ability. And again, if you're using Draeger and you create them, then they have +1 health, and if you've used other cards such as logos to increase their attack, they come out even stronger. These guys could come out as a 10/10. They could come out if you've used other like +1/+1. I mean, just the stats that they can be as a flanker and then threaten your opponent's troops or just end the game on its own merit. It's a very good card. Latrapus also has a good ability. I hate playing against Forex box because once Latrapus hits, it's like you've got a timer counter, and I used to play that against with Kurz all the time when I was testing Kurz, because you just throw up frontline after frontline, and at a certain point the clock ticks, and if you can't get lethal, Kurz Night Haunter goes away. That's not a great ability, but it is one reason if you want to use Attrition Warfare on your turn, and you've thrown down the Latrapus and it has survived, then you pay 2 energy and you deal 15 damage to your enemy's warlord. That seems really cool. That's a good trade-in, but again, it's a late game combo, 2 specific cards for 1 specific thing. I would rather just use these guys to attack for 8, and I would never include this card in my deck just because it costs 10. And I really think that the Iron Warriors as a whole are combo driven. You can benefit from having a card down on the board, but those cards in the Iron Hands or the Iron Warriors card pool benefit by being enhanced by other cards that you either have on your hand or that are in your deck that you're drawing, whether that be logos, whether that be Sheath and Steel, whether that be Harsh Discipline, Percharavos Wrath, Dominators, or combinations of cards to deal damage, such as Contrador and Precision Bombardment, or Contrador and Rack and Ruin, which can be played in the same turn at 10 energy, not to mention any other neutral damage dealing tactic, right? And if your opponent has only got 1 Warlord, you're able to throw down Mortar Strike, you're able to throw down any of the wonderful chaos tactics, avoid engagement. You could throw down Breach, Informant Network. At this point in time now, you could do Rack and Ruin and still throw down Planetary Purge. There are so many damage dealing tactics that it really enhances that aspect of the game. I think overall, the minor changes that I made to the card pool for the Iron Warriors were good. There were some legendaries. There were some key legendaries that got changed and made them better, made the legendary worth playing, and enhanced the late game of the Iron Warriors. But I think really the selling point is the enhancement to the timing of tactics and cards such as Arcology added to the game to breathe new life into their lethal range, to offer opportunities for whispers for Percherabo in a better shape and form. Let's take a look at their counterattack. Their counterattack is even better because it deals 1 damage to all units in play. If you add that with viral bombs, you have you've gone from dealing 2 damage to 3 damage across the board, as well as expanding the lethal range for viral bombs. And because it works for low initiative, there's only one warlord in the faction who has low initiative. And that means Percherabo can benefit from it even greater. In odd circumstances, I have used superior firepower to destroy my own Arcology, and then used my counterattack to destroy all those civilians on my turn, and then to use my whispers. Now that is really reaching, and that was a desperate play, but it can be done. It is a play. It seems better off to use a viral bombs in my mind, but the fact that you can deal that 1 extra damage to everybody, sometimes that is enough to make it or break it. And I think they're doing, the Iron Warriors are fairly well sat right now. We're never going to see Siege work fantastically, but their burst potential and the damage that they can do is respectable. Some warlords have a harder time than others, just no doubt about it, but they can win. I do think that there's probably a couple minor things that could still be done within the faction. I think the way it is the card pool works, they're fine. I think it's really the enhancements are going to come out of the neutral cards. All the neutral cards that enhance vehicles, and there's quite a few of them. All the neutral cards that offer you troops to just throw upon the anvil, as it were, so to speak. Anything like that that's going to benefit you as a long game if you want to play a long game. If you don't want to play a long game, guess what? You don't have to either, because the tactic game for Iron Warriors can be brutally short. So that's it, guys. That is the Iron Warriors card by card reboot. I hope it's been beneficial. I hope there's some cards in there that you saw that you were kind of on the fence about, or weren't sure quite how to apply. Kind of learned something. If you're not quite sure what they do or how to apply them, give them a test out. And if you don't have them, I'd say cards to stay away from in the shop. Stay away from 30th Heavy. Stay away from Forgebreaker for now. Stay away from Latrapus. And stay away from Endymion. Everything else you can kind of pick up as you go along, and they'll have value and they'll have merit. So that's it for me, guys. Until next time, keep playing Legions, and we will talk to you later. Bye.